Hi. So let's all take a deep breath. And if you have not already done so, if you can please turn your phones on silent. If you need to use it, feel free to go outside, but it'll interrupt our panelists if we see you on the phone. Thank you. I'm being told that I'm very quiet, so where's the mic person? Thank you. My name is Chani. I'm the Director of Special Initiatives here at Footsteps. Thank you. And we have incredible panelists here. One of our panelists had a family emergency. Chaim Levin is not able to make it. So we're really sorry about that. I would like to introduce our panelists, and then I'll explain how we'll be working the panel together. Just a reminder, Yomali, if you can please raise your hand. If you have any questions about Footsteps or if you need to know where something is, feel free to reach out to Yomali. Julia, if you have questions for the panelists, we will have a half an hour at 10:30 where we will take questions from the audience. Please you were given index cards when you walked in. If you can please write them. All of you have pens in your bags. If you can write the questions, find Julia. She'll grab the cue cards and bring it up to us at 10:30. Thank you. So hi. Fraidy. So I'll give you a little bio about Freddy. Freddy Reese was 19 when her ultra-Orthodox Jewish family arranged her marriage to a violent man. She was trapped in that abusive marriage until she defied her community to attend college, graduating from Rutgers University at the age of 32 as the valedictorian. Her family declared her dead, but Fraidy persevered. She got divorced and won custody of her 2 daughters. Fraidy knows that most women, girls, and LGBTQ individuals who want to escape a forced marriage need some support. For them, Fraidy founded and now leads Unchained at last, the only organization dedicated to ending forced and child marriage in the U.S. through a direct service and advocacy. Through Unchained, Fraidy has helped more than 550 survivors to escape forced marriages. Additionally, she started a national movement to end child marriage in the U.S. So far, she has helped to achieve historic legislative victories in New Jersey, Delaware, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Thank you, Fraidy, for being here. Jean Steinberg. Jean Stammer was born and raised in the Hasidic village of Kiryas Joel. At the age of 28, he left Orthodox Judaism to live a life aligned with his personal values. Steinberg is the executive director of Freidom, an organization he founded in 2012 to address the need of social and emotional support for those leaving insular Orthodox Jewish community. Freidom focuses on members regaining a community and a sense of belonging, with diverse pairs supporting each other on their journey to personal freedom, trying different cultural experiences to familiarize themselves with the world around them, and learning about societal norms and how to navigate mainstream secular culture. Based in New York with 12 regional communities across North America, Freidom supports over 1,300 members and hosts 200 events annually. Steinberg is a social butterfly who enjoys good food, the outdoors, and dark humor. He lives with his life partner, Mary Winters, and their 2 dogs. And Miriam Oster. Thank you for being here. Miriam is a doctoral student in sociology at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. She's a Mellon Humanities Public Fellow and a Wexner Graduate Fellow. Her research interests are in the sociology of culture and religion, with a focus on ultra-Orthodox groups and those who leave. Miriam helped found YAFFED with her now husband, Naftali, at that time boyfriend, right? So welcome all for being here. Thank you. So Miriam, who are you? What was the need that you saw, and what did you do about it?
Thanks, Chani, for the introduction. I'm Miriam Moster, and like Chani said, I helped co-found YAFFED with my husband, Naftali. So Naftali would have loved to be here himself, actually, but he had a 2-day training program that couldn't be moved. So I'm going to represent him and speak about YAFFED. So what was the need? YAFFED arose to address the lack of education in Hasidic yeshivas. In many Hasidic in boys' yeshivas in particular, boys learn 1.5 to 2 hours of secular studies a day up until age 13, and then after that point, don't get any secular education at all. And this leaves them functionally illiterate and very likely to be living in poverty, and it really limits their opportunities after that point. So initially, we considered different approaches and different ways of addressing this need. My involvement was really a lot to do with the logistics of getting a nonprofit off the ground back in those early days, meeting with Department of Education officials, making people aware of the problem, because there was really a lack of awareness at that point. When I first met my husband, I myself hadn't been aware of the extent of the problem until he introduced it to me and told me about his own educational experiences growing up in a Hasidic community. So in those early days, that was the focus, and then it expanded from there to more grassroots efforts, working with parents, with Hasidic, trying to get Hasidic parents to be able to be more outspoken about this issue, former yeshiva students, graduates of these yeshivas, to be more outspoken. My husband led a very successful PR campaign, spreading public awareness about this issue. Back in the day, very few people, even like myself, knew the extent of the issue, and today, most people, especially people in Jewish communities, are aware of what's going on. And then also on the legal front, pushing for reform through lawsuits is another way of addressing this problem, and legislative reform. So that's basically where we are today from those very early beginnings.
Thank you. Jean, who are you? What was the need, and what did you do about it?
Thank you, Chani. Good morning, everyone. It's a gift to see you all here, because I wasn't planning on being here. My plan for today was to be dead. No, that's not dark humor. I can explain. I was born in a Hasidic village in New York, as you mentioned. Growing up, there were a lot of rules, and there was a need for conformity. At the age of 9, I began questioning Judaism and religion in general. During my teenage years, I tried to suppress, sort of successfully. But in my 20s, living a life that wasn't really me became suffocating. It was painfully suffocating, and I knew I can't continue to live life in a community that I don't believe in the same values. But at the same time, the thought of me leaving and hurting my parents was equally painful. So I found myself in a situation where I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. So to escape that pain, I decided to end my life. When I failed at that attempt, I had this epiphany that I didn't really want to be dead. What I really wanted was to live a life that's truly me. I just didn't want to live a lie. I made a promise to myself that if I ever get out of this community alive, that I will do everything within my power to help others who are in similar situations so they don't have to suffer the way I did. Before I left, I met my best friend, Rachel. She was a brilliant woman, non-judgmental, empathetic, a great listener. So naturally, people who were looking for a listening ear gravitated to her. When I left the community, Rachel and I would make plans every weekend. So as we started hanging out over the weekend, Rachel would ask me, is it okay if I invite so-and-so to be part of and join us for dinner? And I would say, okay. And then she would explain that person left the community, lost all their friends, lost all their family. They don't have anyone. So the next week she asked me on a different person, would it be okay to join? This one said, also left the community, they have social anxiety, they have difficulty making new friends, they don't know how to approach it. In a short time, through Rachel, I got to meet a dozen wonderful people who have left the community who were looking for social. Rachel also suffered from mental illness. And in January of 2010, she ended her life through suicide. That turned my life upside down on a personal level, but it also, I couldn't help but wonder, what about those people that Rachel introduced me to that she got to know, who confided in her? And it can't be just those, there's gotta be more. And that's when I told myself I have to start something that does specifically social support. I wasn't in the best of place at the time, but in October of 2012, I sort of collected the pieces, and that's when I started Freidom, an organization for individuals who are leaving the community or who have left the Orthodox Jewish community to provide social and support and help rebuild community and introduce them to societal norms. And for those of you who are not Yiddish speakers, the name Freidom has in it the word frei, which is in Yiddish for free, so that's why we named it Freidom. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Fraidy, who are you? What was the need, and what did you do about it?
Well, as you said before, Chani, I was raised in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, and as is the norm in that community, my family arranged my marriage when I was young. I was 19, to a stranger, and unfortunately, the stranger turned out to be violent. But I was trapped in this abusive marriage for 15 years. I, first of all, had no reproductive rights. I was not allowed to use birth control, and I was required to have unprotected sex with my husband. I had limited financial rights. I was not allowed to work unless he allowed me to, which he didn't. And even if he did, any money I earned would have belonged to him. I was not allowed to have my own bank account, my own credit card. I was completely financially dependent on my husband. I also had limited legal rights in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. A man is allowed to divorce his wife, but a woman does not have that right. And so I was trapped, as I said, for 15 years. And when I finally managed to get out, my family punished me by shunning me. They declared me dead. They told me they were planning to sit Shiva for me. I'll go through the Jewish mourning ritual for me as if I had literally died, which until today I don't know if they've done, because I've had almost no contact with them since then. But I have rebuilt my life with my two daughters, and I realized after I managed to become financially and emotionally independent that most people, including the siblings and the friends that I left behind, need a little support when they are escaping from a forced marriage, either when they're saying no to their parents who are planning a wedding for them that they don't want, or when they're already in this marriage and they realize, I never wanted this, how do I get out of this? And that's why I founded Unchained at Last, which is the only organization that is dedicated to ending forced and child marriage in the United States. And we do that through both direct services as well as advocacy.
So, Fraidy, we'll start with you this time. What are the challenges within the organization, and what surprised you when you started this?
Both of those? Challenges and surprises? Well, I'll start with the surprises. So when I first founded Unchained at Last, the plan was to help people, the advocacy piece was not a part of the original plan. It was all about providing direct services. We provide really comprehensive, crucial services, wraparound services, legal and social services, always for free, to help, we thought it would be mostly women, to escape from forced marriages, either one that's being planned for them or one they're already in. And what shocked us was that more and more girls under the age of 18 started reaching out to Unchained to ask for the same help. And we discovered that the US has a serious child marriage problem. And because of the way the laws are written, the only way to help children is to change the laws, because there's almost nothing we can do to help a child to escape without breaking laws. Anybody know the youngest age you can marry right now in the United States? Who said 0? All right, Jackie got it. She's been listening. Yeah, it's actually, in a lot of the United States, there is no minimum age to marry. And our research at Unchained at last showed that between 2000 and 2010, an estimated 248,000 children were married in the US, as young as 12. And almost all of them were girls married to adult men. So that's why we have now added this little piece, in our spare time, we're just gonna end child marriage in the United States, no big deal.
Jean, what are the challenges and what surprised you?
So, I expected that there's a need for social support. When we started out, our goal was to have 2 events a month, one in New York City, one in Rockland, and we came to realize that there is a way more, on a much larger scale, a need for that, to the point that we're averaging 16 events a month, not just in New York, we have over 1,300 members across a dozen cities in the US and Canada, so that was more than expected. But what really surprised me was this goes back a year into existence, and we're sitting around the Thanksgiving dinner. There's some Freidom members, and we're going around the table doing the routine, what are you thankful for? And one member says, I'm thankful for Freidom. And I was touched. But the person saw that I didn't grasp the magnitude of what they just said, and then said, I need you to understand, this last year was the toughest year of my life. My family, my community has put me through hell since I've left, to the point that I was ready to give up numerous times. But knowing that there's a Freidom event coming up, that I have something to look forward to, is what kept me going. So I am alive today because of Freidom. And that surprised me, because I knew that we're making a difference, but I was not aware at the time that we're literally saving lives. So that's what surprised me. It was a humbling experience, but a surprise.
Thank you. Thank you. And Miriam, what surprised you and what are the challenges?
So an initial challenge was starting an organization from scratch as the catch-22 around funding, where you have to have like a demonstrated record to show people you're worth funding, but you also need money to get those projects off the ground. So that was an initial hurdle that YAFFED is well past at this point, but something I remember from those earlier days. Another challenge that the organization has in general is, as a grassroots organization, it's very hard to get people, like the grassroots people that YAFFED is trying to organize, to actually speak up on this issue, because people within the community who YAFFED is trying to help are in the Hasidic community. They're afraid to speak up, unwilling to speak up, scared even of what YAFFED is in some cases because of the fear-mongering going on within the Hasidic community. So parents within the community are very unlikely to speak up. Parents who leave the community but have kids still in the system, especially parents who are divorced, you have issues there where they're afraid to speak up because they're afraid that might jeopardize things, for their relationship with their kids, or if the case is in the court, there's a chance that speaking up on this issue might be useful to them in the court, but also the risk that might end up undermining their case. So parents who really support YAFFED are afraid to speak up on this issue. And then you have the people who leave the community. So graduates of these Hasidic yeshivas who leave, but then, that's really this community right here, but then they're struggling a lot on their own just to get their own lives together without the support of family, putting themselves through college, working to support themselves. So these are the voices that YAFFED does sometimes get to speak up, but they're also limited just because people are so tied down with other responsibilities. Some surprises. One main surprise was the lack of awareness on this issue, not only in the general public, but even in the Jewish community initially, and even surprisingly among DOE officials. So I'll tell you one quick story, an anecdote from those early days. So in the beginning, we were lining up meetings with Department of Education superintendents because it's the responsibility of district superintendents to make sure that schools in their districts are meeting education requirements. So we went through the districts, figured out which superintendents have yeshivas in their districts that are not meeting education requirements, and started meeting with those superintendents. And at one meeting, it was me, my husband, and the superintendent. The superintendent was really sympathetic. She said, but it's just not within the scope of my authority to do anything about this issue. You'd probably have to take it up to the Board of Regents or something. And Naftali says, no, this is exactly within the scope of your authority. And he points her to the DOE website, where it actually lays out that responsibility, that district superintendents are tasked with overseeing both public and non-public schools in their district. And I think it was just the dumbfoundedness on the part of these officials as to their own responsibilities, and then, unfortunately, their unwillingness to actually act on it afterward. That was shocking in those early days.
Thank you. So I want to ask Fraidy and Jean if you guys have that experience where people who are going through that can't really help in the same way in terms of advocacy or in terms of fear of being seen, if that shows up in your organizations as well. So one of the things that Miriam said was that the people who are leaving either don't have the support to be advocates and or the time and energy, and sometimes they're afraid. So I'm wondering if you guys encounter that as well.
Well, definitely. The survivors that Unchained works with, when they're going through their trauma and soon thereafter, they're just not in a position to be able to, they can, barely function on their own. They're in crisis mode. But what we have found, because Unchained was founded in 2011, we've been around now for 9 years, and what's beautiful to see is that often, after a couple of years, survivors come back and say that they're ready to pay it forward, and they're able to mentor some of the other survivors who are going through the same trauma that they once experienced. And so we're lucky to see that happen, but it takes a lot of time.
So we see that too, right at Footsteps. Look at who's on the panel here, and it's just it's time and energy and space, and then this miracle happens, right? You guys go out and create organizations that make incredible changes, and I think that that's amazing.
And some people just want to move on with their lives, and that's perfectly okay. Also, they want to just pretend it never happened. And sometimes I wake up and I wish I had gone that route. But it is beautiful when those people who want to pay it forward have a way to do that.
Yeah. What about you?
So I'll say as well, it's a mixed bag, but a lot of Freidom members step up and take on roles, whether it's hosting events or giving back in different ways. Sometimes in the beginning, people are, I don't know if they're not capable because they're not physically capable, or they're in a place where it's just too much. Right now, they need to find themselves and figure out their lives, and that's totally okay. But the way I see it is that every Freidom member is a leader regardless, just by showing up, by being there, by supporting others, by helping build community and connections. So I view it as everyone is a leader and chips in just by showing up.
Yeah, for sure.
But I also wanted to quickly, that you asked about challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the challenges that we have seen is we try to create creative programming at a low cost free. A lot of our members don't, they're economically challenged because they didn't get an education, because they lost their job because of the community, or otherwise are dealing with other difficult issues. So that seems to be a challenge since they can't afford, and we're trying to create events of how to creatively coming up with different types of ideas to make it affordable or make it a free event. Like, we've taken a lot of members to Broadway plays, and we take museums, ballet. So we always try to find either great deals, or sometimes we've partnered with certain schools that had extra tickets for shows that we give away. So that's part of a challenge. But another big challenge is the vetting process. We get a lot of attempts by people in the community trying to find out who is participating. So that makes the vetting challenging. Everyone who participates has to be vetted. We have a process of how they have to be vetted. And I find that because safety, member safety is our #1 concern. There are people who have custody issues. There are people who still live in the community and look Orthodox, but really are not religious, so they have a lot to lose, whether it's their marriage, their kids, their job. So that's a challenge. And I found, since we do a lot of regional communities around the country, so running that remotely has its own challenges of not having in every place boots on the grounds, that we have to do it from New York. And something I found very interesting also, that the smaller the community is, because depending which regional community I'm referring to may have a smaller membership, it seems to be more difficult to get people to trust each other, because it's a small, tight-knit community that people take a longer time to open up and actually trust someone. And in a lot of sense, the regional communities, I find, need more support than here in New York that we provide, because Freidom is the only resource there. So those are some of the challenges.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to go back to what Fraidy said. Sometimes I wish I didn't do this. And so why do you do it? And what helps you stay connected to the cause? Like, how do you stay connected? How do you take care of yourself? Can you guys hear me? Yeah. How do you stay connected? How do you kind of take care of yourself? And like, why do you keep doing that, right? So it makes a lot of sense why you started it, but then all of you keeping on. And so like, what helps you keep going?
Well, for me, it's just plain old stubbornness. If I'm not succeeding, then my family was right. So I am here to prove them wrong.
So what keeps you going, Jean?
I may be stubborn, but I don't think that's my reason. I like to say that this type of work can never be difficult enough to not be worth the reward. So, just forgetting about the mission, what we as supporters get out of it, just meeting and interacting with members. We have a diverse group of brilliant, courageous people who are trying to live self-determined lives despite all the obstacles and all the odds against them. Meeting those people is worth it in its own. And if I'm allowed to use the word nachas here, I don't know. So the rewarding feeling of witnessing when members get to rebuild their social circle. When we do an intake or when we see them for the first time, they know no one because they've lost everything. And to see them slowly rebuild and making friends and building an entire network, that's what I call nachas. So that keeps me going. As I mentioned before, knowing that doing this saves lives is in its own a reason to continue doing. And I'm not gonna lie, it gets difficult sometimes. And then I have to tell myself, remember how you personally struggled and how that felt? And that will always keep me going to make sure that no one else has to deal with that.
Thank you. Before we go back to Miriam, Fraidy, what do you do on the hard days? How do you take care of yourself?
So when I first founded Unchained at last, one of the biggest problems I had was a lot of staff turnover because there's so much vicarious trauma from witnessing what's going on. So not only witnessing the terrible stories of the survivors we work with, but also the frustration of talking to legislators across the United States and having them say, well, I don't know, so child marriage destroys girls' lives and there are girls being forced to marry their rapists, why is that so bad? And so there's just a lot of frustration that comes with that. And I was very lucky that I have a wonderful person I can turn to when I need help, which is Lonnie Santo from Executive Director of Footsteps, who was one of the first people I turned to when I wanted to found Unchained, and also the first person I turned to and I said, why is everybody leaving Unchained? And she said, well, what are you doing to deal with vicarious trauma? And I said, we just acknowledge it. And she said, well, you need to do a little more than that. So we actually have a lot of programs in place now to deal with it, including monthly art therapy sessions, and we are across the street from a Carvel, and we have ice cream therapy, is very powerful, and clinical supervision for everyone who works directly with survivors, and we find that all very important. We also have, twice a year, we have a staff retreat. We call it the Day of No Bullshit, and we have one coming up in February, and those are very much needed and wanted.
Thank you. Miriam, what keeps you going on days when it's like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, and I'll talk about that last question that you raised also. So I think, what's motivating is the progress that YAFFED has made. So that's certainly very motivating. But the risks are real as well, though. So one thing that we've lost is it's really meant sacrificing a lot with both of our families. There are family events, simchas, that we're not invited to on both sides because of them reacting to the work that Naftali is doing and its visibility within their community. Another thing is personal safety. Naftali's gotten a couple of death threats. There was one night he got this, really nasty email that basically wished him that he would die. And the next day, he hadn't even had a chance to mention it to me. I was home alone with our 2-year-old son, and I get a knock on the door, and a person with the same last name is there, and I didn't even know the history that someone had sent him this email with a package looking for my husband. So I open the door, I take it was a man with a yarmulke, religious looking, and me, coming from ultra-Orthodox community, still feels that sense of, safety around people with this look. So I open the door, okay, where are you from? It was the story wasn't quite piecing together. He wasn't quite telling me how he knows my husband. Okay, I take the bag, I called my husband, someone just dropped off a package for you, tell him the name, and he's like, oh my gosh, he goes off the phone, calls the police, files a police report, and that was our evening. We had police in our house, they ended up contacting this person, he apologized, he's like, oh, it was just a misunderstanding, but there's that real risk associated with this work when people are reacting so viscerally within the community. There's also this Rockland legislator, Hasidic legislator in Rockland County, who was doxing my husband on social media, on Twitter, posting personal information, contact information. He started pulling personal pictures of our family and posting them on his Twitter. So the measures we've taken, we have video cameras installed around our home. We are careful not to post pictures of our child, of his face on social media to at least protect him from some of this. The risks are very real. At the same time, the progress is real too.
And the second question, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah, so the care is in very, concrete ways. Cameras around our house, call the police the second something happens so people know if you threaten my husband, if you threaten our family, we're not just going to sit back and just hope it passes. We're taking active measures to make sure our family is safe and making sure people know that we're taking those measures to prevent these things from happening in the future.
Beautiful. Thank you. So before we take questions from the audience, I have one or two more questions to ask.
You don't want to know how I take it?
Go ahead, sorry. So
For me, it's easy. I just take it out on Mary. No, I'm kidding. I'm really lucky to have Mary by my side, to be an anchor and a support, and she knows me well enough to say, you need to take a break. And that for me usually means either I go to the gym, play basketball, or try to listen to some stupid sports radio, which gets my mind off it. But mostly marry, so thank you.
Thank you. So as someone who does this work as well, I'm going to go out of my moderator position for a minute and share what I do, because I think the more people hear what we do to take care of ourselves, the more skills we go away with. So I hike almost every single morning. I live 5 minutes from a mountain, and I'm out there in the woods every single morning, and I leave the stress on the mountain. That really helps. And if anyone has a furry friend, like a dog or a cat, that helps too. Like I go out with my dog, and I throw the ball, and after 10 minutes of throwing the ball, whatever happened is on the ball, in the dog's mouth, and back, and it just kind of the stress is left in the backyard. So just whatever it is that you love to do, or what works for you, if any of us are doing work that brings up vicarious trauma or danger to our family or our own stuff, it's really important to take time, because research shows that there's something, just like there's vicarious trauma, there's also incredible satisfaction in doing this work if we take care of ourselves. So that's kind of just my plug for self-care. And I'm going to go back to being your moderator here. How can the community who's here support you? Yeah.
So one thing that would always be helpful is having just more voices on this issue. YAFFED is always looking for people to come out to press conferences, there are Department of Education events that are going on pretty much monthly. They're pretty regular. And just having more people and different voices coming out rather than just the same repeating voices makes a difference. It makes a difference for elected officials to see more faces representing this issue, and for the public, to see that this is an issue with a lot of support and with a lot of people standing up for it, and especially yeshiva graduates. So if there are graduates in the room or in the broader community who are able to come out to events. Another thing is social media, and especially Twitter. Twitter is something that the media follows, reporters follow, and government officials follow. So follow YAFFED on Twitter, retweet, help YAFFED's post gain visibility, and tweet your own things about this. Use hashtags around this issue. Hashtags like YeshivaGate is a popular one around this issue. But it's really helpful. Naftali has actually gotten feedback from politicians and from people in the media, from reporters, about tweets, about Twitter. So this is something they're monitoring actually quite closely, and that's really useful. If people, it's a simple thing to do. It just takes a few minutes. Follow, tweet, retweet, but it's actually really helpful to the cause. And lastly, of course, donations. Any contribution you're able to make would certainly help the cause as well.
I'm not sure why you say lastly. Start with. Money always helps. But aside from money, getting the word out that we exist so potential members can find us. Volunteer services, we can use volunteers in various different ways. Professional services, for example, if you're a graphic designer, a website designer, grant writing, I've yet to find someone to tell me what they do for me to be unable to take advantage of their services. So trust me, just say hello and tell me what you have to offer. But, and also, as I mentioned, since we're trying to do things on a budget for members, if you know of any discounted free opportunities or programming, let us know. That would be helpful. And I'll be around all day, so feel free to reach out, or we're available. You want to find us, freidom.org. It's Freidom, F-R-E-I, as in Freidom instead of freedom.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
At Unchained LS, we always have some sort of scheme that we're working on, and so I urge all of you to get involved. A lot of them, I think all of them, are empowering and also just fun. For example, we invented a form of protest called a chain-in. Anyone here have been to one of our chain-ins? Okay. So at our chain-ins, people donate to us bridal gowns that we can use. So we all wear bridal gowns and veils, and we chain our wrists and tape our mouths to show legislators and the public this is what life looks like for a girl or a woman who is forced to marry. We have our next chain-in coming up is Valentine's Day in Minnesota, because who would not want to stand in Minnesota in February in a bridal gown? So I urge you to join us, and we have other chain-ins planned as well. We also have an event we haven't even announced yet coming up. The Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations is mid-March, so we have consultative status with the UN, and we're doing a side event on March 13th at the law firm White & Case in Midtown, where we are going to screen this gorgeous film called Woman, which the filmmakers interviewed thousands of women from around the world, and the film shows hundreds of those women from every culture and country and culture, and it's just a beautiful film. I happen to be in it as well, so. And I hope that you will join. If you go to unchained.last.org, you'll see all our upcoming events, other ways to volunteer, and of course, donate. And as Miriam said, social media is so powerful. So just share, like, follow, retweet, whatever you can do to spread the word.
Thank you. And the last question before we go to open-ended questions from the audience, we knew that some people would want to know, how do you found an organization? What do you need to do? Like the logistics. So in maybe 1 minute, like, and I know, I'm hearing Lonnie laugh. It takes a whole lot, but like, if somebody wanted to start an organization, what's like one tidbit that you would each give them? So, Fraidy.
I would say make sure you really, really want this.
Okay.
Because you have to be relentless and shameless in asking other people for help and for money, and you have to be a total badass.
I say have a supporting team that believes in you and believes in your cause, because that's very important. I'll also add that if anyone here wants to start something or has any ideas, feel free to talk to me. I'd be more than happy to chat.
And another important thing is to be aware of the specific needs you want to address and to what extent those needs are being met by other organizations or other services. So where would you step in to meet needs that are not yet being met at all? There are a lot of organizations out there like Footsteps who are doing really wonderful work, and then there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So I think being very clear on what you're addressing, not repeating something that's already done, or that could just be a place, to find partners and allies, but finding the specific need and a specific mission that where you can step in and get something done on the issue.
Yes. And on that note, Footsteps has something called the Ignite Grant. So if anyone wants to start an organization or has ideas that are not yet out there, meaning if these organizations don't exist yet, you can reach out to Yael. She's the one who kind of takes care of that, and we have grants that we do give to our members about starting organizations. So, it's not
a project, like, right? It doesn't have to be
right.
an organization.
Yeah, it's not only organizations. If you see a need in the community that you want to fill, we have grants for it. So it doesn't have to be an organization. It can just be, I don't know, I want to do a bunch of X, and just reach out to us, and we have those grants. Julia, anyone who has questions, cue cards, if you want to give them to Julia so that we can ask the panelists.
You could raise them up and I'll grab them.
Okay. So what effects, if any, do you believe that recent attacks in Jersey City and Muncie will have on persons in the Hasidic community who are considering leaving? Have you seen an uptick in contact since these events? Any one of you want to answer that?
Speak a little bit around the Jersey City attack, not specifically to people leaving the community, but certainly to the effect it's had on YAFFED. So one thing that happened as a result of this is that voices within the religious community have actually started blaming Naftali and the work that YAFFED is doing for these attacks, which was shocking. Like, it was really out of left field to associate physical violence against Jews with education reform in the Hasidic community. There was an Anti-Semitism March just like a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, and an ultra-Orthodox man, Pascal Bennett, got up and spoke at that march, and he basically blamed education reformers for anti-Semitism, which was like shocking, you know? So we're certainly feeling some, I mean, it seems like they're pulling at straws almost because they're so upset at the progress that's being made. And this is a very evocative thing to draw on, you know, anti-Semitism. And so that's how YAFFED is feeling a connection with these attacks.
So, hard to know how it's going to affect, so I'm not going to speak to that effect. But as far as the anti-Semitism attacks specifically against the ultra-Orthodox, we at Freidom felt that it was important for us to participate in it wasn't an anti-Semitism rally, it was a solidarity rally. So we felt it was important for us to participate, and we had an event that we actually ended up going to the rally. And it was important to us because we think it's important to make a distinction that, yes, we can criticize things that are happening in the ultra-Orthodox community because things need to change and members people who leave need to be treated better, or even in the community, and that's okay. At the same time, hate and anti-Semitism is not okay, even if it's against ultra-Orthodoxy, which is why we participated.
And I was going to say something similar. I mean, we haven't seen a change at Unchained at last, and at Unchained we help people from any culture or religion or any background, anyone who's interfacing a forced marriage. But my concern with this, in addition to, of course, the fact that it's just terrifying that there's this kind of hatred in the country, there's also the concern, similar to what you said, that it becomes harder to point out real problems in the community if they're under attack, and then, you're just adding to anti-Semitism. And I just want to be sure that we can all still talk honestly about the problems within the Orthodox Jewish community, even though obviously no one here is an anti-Semite.
I think that's really important, what all of you said, that there is this fear that we can't speak out, because if we speak out, then are we being anti-Semitic? And the reality is that we get to do activism and speak about what's not working and still want for our community to be safe. One has nothing to do with the other. Okay, so have any of you been in touch with or connect with other organizations that do similar things? And they have a specific question here of, as the ICSA, International Cultic Studies Association, and those who have different religious backgrounds. So have any of you been in touch with other organizations who do similar work?
Well, there is no one who does similar work to Unchained at last. We are one of a kind. And we are, we are not focused on any one community, so the reaching out to other communities is less relevant to us. But what we do like to do is partner with any group that has similar interests. And so, of course, Footsteps is a really powerful ally of ours. But in addition, we have partnered with some international and national groups that care about women's rights or human rights in general, and those include Human Rights Watch, Santa International, Global Citizen, and so we're very lucky to have some really great partners.
What about the two of you? Any similar organizations?
So obviously there's Footsteps, so we've partnered in the past many times. But we try to not necessarily just partner with people in the same field. We're looking to partner with organizations that can do something that we try to do with programming. For example, we have a partnership with the Met Museum. Every 2 months, we have a Met curator do a guided tour for our members. We have members who have never been to a museum before, where they get to actually have a guided tour, a discussion. Sometimes we have readings before. Specifically, we've been doing a series on ancient East ancient Near Eastern art, which very much coincides with a lot of the upbringing teachings that we were raised on. And we have partnerships with different community, community centers where we can host events. So absolutely, we try to take advantage of whatever is out there. Speaking of a museum, I just think I don't think I got a chance to say, I want to quickly say that Freidom, our objective is threefold. First is social and rebuilding community. The second thing we focus on is introducing members to cultural experience that we may have been deprived of during upbringing, which would be something like a museum or food festivals, different ethnic. And the third one is hands-on education on societal norms. There's this myth out there that ultra-Orthodox Jews are rude. What a lot of people don't understand is that there are certain norms in the community which that is, if you don't behave that way, that would be considered rude. But once you leave that community and you go into mainstream society, those are no longer the norms. So when we get members into mainstream society interacting, whether it's knowing how to tip in a restaurant or even holding a door, whether it's the same gender or the opposite gender. So these are all things that the events focus on. But I wanted to get back to the museum. We had one of our members come to the museum, and he quietly came over to me and said, I'm 35 years old. I have never been to a museum. Tell me, what am I supposed to do here? Which, it could be funny, but it's really sad that someone at that age was deprived. So just to wrap it up, yes, we partner with anyone who's willing. So once again, thank you.
And yes, for YAFFED as well. YAFFED's in touch with organizations in Israel and Canada and England that are working on the same issue. The problem of Hasidic education is pretty widespread. There are some countries that have actually reacted more strongly and enforced the laws, and there you see better outcomes. But in many countries, like in the US here and in Israel, this problem is persistent, and education activists across countries are in touch with each other. And another area where there's some collaboration is among education activists on other issues. So in Rockland County, there are education issues that extend beyond the Hasidic community, but they end up being very interrelated just because of the dynamics in Rockland County and the school board. So YAFFED is in touch with local education activists involved in other education issues as well, and has worked collaboratively with them.
And in terms of footsteps, yes, we work collaboratively with other organizations and people coming from other insular communities. We've worked with Muslimish and formerly fundamentalist, and I feel like there's one more that I'm missing. Yeah, ex-Muslims of North America. So we've partnered many times with other organizations and kind of collaborated with them as well. Fraidy, there's a question for you, two actually. One, do you also work on legislation to free agunot?
No. So our position at Unchained at Last is that we focus on getting women a civil divorce. My position when I got divorced was I didn't want a get because that document has been used to torture women for thousands of years, and I want nothing to do with it. Thank you. It was a beautiful thing to refuse to accept the get, and I told the rabbi who called me up all confused because he's used to women begging for it. I told him, $5 million cash, and then we'll discuss, And then he called me a second time, and I said, I never got my $5 million, so I can't discuss this. So we do not get involved in the get process at all, and I tell everyone just, my advice, if you have to go to a bet-in, is stay away from a bet-in. Just don't do it.
And the second question, how do you create awareness within communities around child forced marriage?
Well, within insular communities, that's very challenging because I do a lot of speaking. I get invited to speak at a lot of places, but insular religious communities that are practicing forced marriage are not inviting me to speak. And so if any of you know a way I can sneak in, pretend I'm talking about something else, and then show up and talk about forced marriage, I can do that, but that is actually one of our biggest challenges, and the only way we can really infiltrate those communities is through word of mouth. And that's, again, something that everybody can help with. But we do often get calls from survivors who ask for help, and they say the way they learned about us is because we helped their friend, their sister, or in one case, even their daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you. On that note, a question came in, and what can the OTD community do to help teens who are trapped in the community but are underage? And I know, Fraidy, you deal with that a lot in terms of marriage, but I think we all deal with that. So let's start with Fraidy and kind of what are some of your thoughts?
Well, so our focus at Unchained is not helping people leave any particular religion. Some of them are leaving a religion while they're getting divorced or escaping a forced marriage, and some of them are not. So we focus on specifically helping them get out of a marriage. And when it comes to teens, unfortunately, the way the laws are written right now in the United States, there's nothing that we can do legally. And in most US states, before the age of 18, children don't have the right to leave home. They're considered runaways. They cannot get into a domestic violence shelter. Shelters will turn away unaccompanied minors. They cannot easily retain an attorney because contracts with children, including retainer agreements, are voidable typically. And they're not allowed to bring a legal action in their own name, which means they're not even allowed to file for divorce. Hashtag end child marriage.
So Miriam or Jean, have any of you worked with teens, and what have you done?
I guess YAFFED's mission is really to help ensure that these teens are not suffering from educational neglect. So YAFFED doesn't work directly with the teens, but an outcome of its work is to actually help these teens within the religious community and to actually give them a more promising future and more prospects, and better prospects, yeah.
So as Fraidy mentioned, teens are a very challenging way of providing support. So we navigate them in different ways. It's not always easy. And I will say, without spelling out the name, that I found at least one organization that is legally allowed to work with teens who we're working with, that when we have a situation that they try to be of help, but they have asked me specifically to not mention their name because they don't want to have repercussions, even though they're legally allowed. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. And at Footsteps, we also struggle with this one about like, what do we do with teens? And there are organizations in the city that do take care of teens and have teen shelters, and so we try to connect them with that. It's complicated because we can't personally serve them, but we do try as much as we can to connect them to services where organizations do work with teens and can take care of them.
And Chani, can I add one thing? What I said before was really dire, and I realize I should add that we do try to find creative ways to work within the legal system to help children. So if you know somebody who is a child who is interfacing a forced marriage, I still would urge you to tell the child that they can reach out to Unchained. So it's dire, but it's not hopeless. We have found creative ways to help children.
Wonderful to hear. Miriam, there's a question for you. Even if you do manage to get the DOE to agree to address the issue, to actually change education, are you concerned that the yeshivas will just continue to thwart the law?
That's a legitimate question. So I think there are two sides to this. There's the DOE and those government officials and that kind of authority, and then there's this groundswell within the community that has resulted from YAFFED's work. There's conversation about this topic that hadn't been had a decade ago. People are talking about it. I mean, people in the community are aware of the ways they're suffering from the lack of education. They see it in the poverty in the community. They see it in their limited options. They see it in their own and their children's inability to communicate in the English language. So I think the community is actually getting pressure from both sides, and that was really a goal of YAFFED's initially, was to have movement within the community as well. So I think that with DOE pressure, there's enough momentum within the community now, enough conversation, that with the right amount of pressure from on top and the discourse from below, that change can actually happen. Because the schools now, I mean, it's not like they're representing, it's not like the authorities within the community are representing all of their parents, the parent body, when they resist change. They're actually not anymore the way they used to when there was no conversation at all on this issue, and that's why I'm hopeful.
Thank you. What are the differences in addressing the challenges of individuals wishing to leave versus entire families wishing to leave? And I think that, like, for Miriam, what are the, where there's one child who wants the education, or whether there's an entire family who wants the education, right? Or with Fraidy, where there's a child who wants to leave the marriage, and whether there is a mother who wants to bring her kids along, or, you know, like there's like a bunch of kind of pieces to that, and I think, Jean, you can just do the question that was asked, but I'm kind of wondering about that. Either one of you start.
Well, a lot of the survivors that Unchained helps to escape do have children, because unfortunately, again, like in my situation, being forced into marriage often also means being forced into motherhood. And of course, that brings a lot of challenges. For us specifically, when it's somebody leaving, trying to get divorced, and has children, that means it's going to be probably a custody battle, and that means finding a pro bono divorce attorney, which is what we do for our clients, is even more challenging. And so we are, again, so fortunate that there are large law firms from across the US that have agreed to represent Unchained clients pro bono. But depending on where it is, in some situations, we have a really hard time finding the legal representation when we say, oh, and there are 6 kids involved. That's not an easy sell for a pro bono attorney.
So a lot of our members don't have access to their children, so unfortunately that's a problem. But those who are lucky, sometimes even if whether they're secretly in the closet, I mean, whether they're secretly not religious, or even if they are religious, where there's some agreements where they have to keep they can't expose the children to non-religious things. So we try to work around that. We have kids programs specifically. So for example, when we have a holiday party, which includes Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, solstice, we do a holiday party, and we had a request from someone, I want to bring my 3 kids, but they can't be exposed. So the first half of the party had only Hanukkah in it, and we told them at what point we'll bring out everything, and they ended up leaving earlier, but they still got an hour and a half with the kids, meeting other kids and making friends. So it's challenging, but depending on the situation, we work around it.
Could you repeat the way you had framed it for me? Thanks.
So what are the challenges in terms, and the differences when it's like one parent who wants to change education, where there's the couple wants the education changed, or there's the whole family where, like, we need to change this? Like, how do you find it different?
Okay, so when it's the whole family that wants it, if like they're actually capable of switching schools, then that could happen, and then they'll do something different for those children. More often, though, it's people within the Hasidic community, you know, the people that actually want change. So there, it's much more of a challenge, where they have to find a way to make it work. They're still very intent on staying in their community school, and they might advocate for change, but very quietly, you know, under the radar. And they might supplement their kids' education on the side, which is not ideal, right? Ideally, the schools should be providing this. And you have cases where the parents are separated or divorced, and one parent wants it and the other does not, and that's where it becomes really complicated, where the parent that wants a better education, you know, might not have the educational decision-making granted to them. They, you know, then this gets back to the courts. Which parent ends up having education decision-making rights over their child? So the parent that might want better and might want the legally mandated education for their child might not even have the decision-making rights to give that to their child. So it's very tricky. Can I step back to one more point I wanted to make about that last question that I was thinking of? And that is about, you know, even if the DOE steps in, will change really happen? So 2 things, looking at 2 other things as models. One is in countries where the government has stepped in, we actually see better results. So once the government steps in, you see the community does respond and does step up to meet the laws more than here, where the government has taken more of a laissez-faire approach up until now. And the second thing is even looking in New York. So at something like the Child Victims Act, there was so much activism around that issue for years, and the community pushed back and they pushed back. And activists probably worried about that too. Like, even if there is legislative reform, will the community really listen? And then the legislation was passed, and the community stepped back from that issue. You know, suddenly things are moving forward. So I think there's a precedent both in other countries and in New York that when the government steps in, when the DOE steps in, when officials step in to do their jobs, the community actually responds and improves based on that, based on what the government is doing.
Yeah. And in terms of the question was, what are the difference in addressing the challenges of individuals wishing to leave and families? And in our work, it is so much easier when an entire family wants to leave, because we're not fighting the spouse, we're not fighting someone who has legal rights, we're fighting maybe grandparents and aunts and uncle and fears that the couple has. But when an entire family wants to leave, it is a lot easier. It's still complicated, but it is a lot easier, and we support them through that in different ways. But it does happen. We still have a few minutes. If anybody else has a question, if you can write it down and kind of show Julia, and she'll come around and get the cards. I have one. So the question is, what connection and supports do you have with non-Hasidic or non-Jewish people? Like, what are your connections in terms of, I'm assuming, the work?
Oh, okay. I mean, I guess with YAFFED, it's those partnerships that we talked about before when you were asking about partnerships outside of the immediate community. So there's also certainly the government side of it, the media side of it. So networks there become very important. Having the right allies in city council, in the New York State Senate. So these are people outside of the immediate community affected, but that have a great impact on the work. And allies with other organizations, like we were talking about before, become very important.
Okay. And I think, do you want to say something about that?
I mean, we don't have any connections to any Orthodox. I thought that was the question.
Yeah,
with
the
Orthodox?
question was like, what are your connections, non-Hasidic or non-Jewish people? Like,
No. Well, all of our connections are non-Hasidic, and some are non-Jewish as well. Like I said, different organizations that we partner with, and volunteers who work. I mean, the Met is not a Jewish, or so I think. But in general, it's the partnerships that we have are mostly either non-Hasidic or non-Jewish. Although being raised Hasidic, once you're not Hasidic, it's irrelevant whether you're Jewish or not.
And similarly, we've gotten support from the modern Orthodox Jewish community, but that's the closest that we've gotten to any sort of partnership with the Orthodox Jewish community, and that's so different and separate.
So, there are more questions. Julia's going to bring that down. Okay. So the question is for Fraidy. What's one thing we can do to help child marriage? Like, what's one thing people here can do? End child marriage.
Just one?
Yeah.
Well, if you have to do just one, then go to unchained.last.org and read about it and talk about it and tweet about it and just be as angry as I am about it. Was that one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and the truth is that most people don't know about it. So simply knowing and understanding the facts and sharing that with people makes a huge difference, because every time we share something, other people learn about it. And Miriam, what's one thing individuals here can do to improve secular education?
Come to events. it's always the more people that show up to these events, to press conferences, to the DOE, they have panel for educational policy meetings where you can actually get up and speak for a few minutes and the DOE chancellor will hear you. He's right there on that panel. Things like that are really important, like I was saying before, to have more voices and more faces so it doesn't just look like the same one person representing YAFFED coming along and talking about this issue. Just one, because that's also how the community likes to frame it, that, it's just these disgruntled people from the community. It's not really a real issue. And having more faces and voices talking about it makes it clear that it is a real issue. It's not just one person that's complaining about the system.
Fraidy, what's the status of child marriage in New York?
Not good. So we had a really good bill. Assembly member Amy Paulin a few years ago read an op-ed I had written in the New York Times, and she reached out and said, I'm introducing a bill tomorrow. And we worked on it together. It was a really great bill, and it immediately faced pushback from the Orthodox Jewish community, and it immediately died. And so the next year, Assembly member Paulin reintroduced the bill, but because of the pushback she had gotten, instead of introducing it the way we had written it, which it would have ended all marriage before the age of 18, because any marriage before 18 is a child marriage, which the State Department, the US State Department calls a human rights abuse. She instead introduced the bill to make the marriage age 17. A lot of legislators say, well, 17 is nearly 18. And well, that nearly is crucial, because at 17, you can't leave home, get into a domestic violence shelter, retain an attorney, et cetera, et cetera. At 18, you can. That nearly is very significant. But unfortunately, that was the best that she thought she could do, and that bill passed. Most of the children who marry in the United States, including here in New York, are age 17. So that bill does not go nearly, I'm going to use that word against them, nearly far enough to end child marriage. And as I predicted, when Governor Cuomo signed the bill, he stood up and announced that he had just ended child marriage in New York, and it was a lie.
And last question, and then we will wrap up. What are your main funding sources? Are you funded from foundation, grants, or individuals? And each one of you, if you can just kind of, where does the funding come from?
At this point, it's a range. In the beginning, I think it was more heavily from individuals when we were just getting started, but at this point, it's that full range that you described.
Same.
We don't get any government funding, or 70% approximately comes from private foundations, and the other 30% comes from generous people like all of you. Thank you, all of you.
Sorry, I would add also I didn't catch the government one. I don't.
No, there's grants, right?
So I don't believe YAFFED is getting government funding. No. Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Anita. Anita's YAFFED's board president. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to say that when Footsteps first came around, nobody in the broader Jewish community wanted to know us. Is that correct? They really didn't. And the more we spoke, the more verbal we became, the more we educated, the narrative changed. But it takes time. And I want to hear from our panelists about that too, but I do want to just say that I can say that we didn't get any support originally from that. And it was very slow moving for the greater Jewish community outside of Orthodoxy to even want to touch us. And so that changes with time. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's been a struggle with YAFFED too. YAFFED recently started a rabbinic council, and we have one of the rabbis here, Rabbi Weinbach. I lost him now, but I saw him before. So, but that's that. Yeah, right there. So thank you. But that's a really big thing, is to have rabbinic support for the work YAFFED is doing. And like you were saying, it is a big challenge. And the work Anita's doing, also really connecting YAFFED to a lot of, or making these introductions to a lot of these, trying to, and succeeding in many cases, these really crucial, like expanding the networks of YAFFED within the Jewish community.
I'll just say, Freidom definitely does not have a rabbinic council. But overall, with the greater Jewish community, we found it to be a mixed bag. Some are very supportive, and some feel like, oh, but you serve non-kosher. So it's been a mixed bag for us.
And from the start, some of Unchained's biggest support has come from Reform and conservative Jewish communities who are horrified that this is happening in the name of their religion. And so for the most part, we've gotten a lot of support, but we have, and I think you might be aware of some recent experiences where there were organizations that said, oh, we can't get involved because we might upset the Orthodox Jewish community. And so I guess what the rest of the Jewish community can do is recognize that there is nothing anti-Semitic or offensive about pointing out the real problems in the Orthodox Jewish community and taking steps to address them.
And on that note, thank you, Fraidy. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Miriam, for being here. Yael has a few announcements for everyone. And thank you all for being here and participating.